Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Backyard Gardens podcast. Your lovely hosts here are Ben and Batavia. Yes, that's right. And we're going to try and make gardening, I don't want to say a little bit easier, but it's, as we get into the quote-unquote off-season, and we move into what we like to think of as the planting season, there's really a whole new season. These are some things that we can definitely look for and we can keep in mind, and we want to keep them top of mind. Some of these are basic, but as you'll hear, we have both made and still continue to make these mistakes, I'm sure, as we go through. So, this is not about starting a garden. Mostly, I want to look at it as keeping your garden running smoothly. And I think that's what we want to do, is keep our garden running smoothly so we can focus more on being productive. Wouldn't you say, Batavia?
Batavia would say.
Batavia would say. So, and by the way, Batavia is talking cryptic today, so good luck. And real quick, before we get started, our next episode is going to air on Halloween. So we want to do something a little bit different, kind of like what we've done in the past. We're going to watch a movie, and not on the air, but we are going to watch a movie that kind of relates to this and to gardening, and we're going to discuss it. So the movie that we have chosen, it is a horror movie that is not bloody. It is not super scary unless you are into gardening and stuff like that. There's not copious amounts of blood. There's not a lot of cussing. Pretty good to watch. It's called Hold Your Breath, and it's on Hulu. So it's all about the Dust Bowl. So we'll be talking about the Dust Bowl a little bit. I have to admit, when I watched it, I already watched it. Batavia hasn't. I got super panicky because of the situation they were living in. And then I started looking into the Dust Bowl, and I was floored by what I started to learn. So if you guys want to watch it, it's an hour and a half, not a super long movie. It's called Hold Your Breath. It's on Hulu, and that is what the next episode will be about. So definitely want to check that out. It's a good movie. I recommend it. And I think we'll learn a lot from it. And maybe we can correct some of our mistakes in the past.
Wait, we're going back in time to correct past mistakes?
Or preventing.
All right, I'm going to give this one more try. Yeah,
because I started reading about statistics. Never a good idea. But we got Batavia to say more than 3 words, so we're going in a good spot.
So let me tell y'all something.
Here we go.
If you're new here, welcome. If you have been a short time, mid-time, or long time listener, you know that I can get wordy. That is me in my everyday life. That's me in my professional life. That's me in all the versions of my life. And so this morning, I wasn't ready for the tussle. Before we started recording, I was just like, okay, yeah. And I have, in my short responses, in my complete acquiescing, I have stumped young Ben. He's visibly uncomfortable without the whole fight in me. So I'm not going to apologize, and I'm not going to say get used to it, but I am going to remind you that you really do love all of my wordiness,
Me?
Even though you pretend that you don't.
Me?
Clearly.
I don't mind. If you didn't talk, it'd be horrible to be on the phone. I just listen to you breathe. And that is one of my pet peeves. I don't like to listen to people breathe, eat, or drink. It's called misophonia, and I'm sorry for everybody who suffers with it. If the sound of chewing food drives you absolutely crazy, you got it.
I have a note in my phone about you, because I'm always like, which one is it? Does he not want to see me eat, or does he not want to hear me
When you first started trying to figure it out, you would turn your camera off, but the volume would be up, and it would drive me insane. Yeah, I mean, it makes me kind of almost get violent. It's a shame, and it really is a problem, but I don't know. You can't do anything about it. Anyway,
generally speaking, it's your problem. Right, but sometimes we're like on here for hours.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you're like, I need to get a little snack. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. It's really bad. My son eats potato chips out of a bag. He'll get the little small bags or whatever, and he eats them one at a time. So it's the crinkling of the hand going in, the chip, the crunch, the chew, and then it's like, because it'll take him like 20 minutes to eat one small bag, and I'm just like, I can't do it. Like, you've got to go somewhere else. Get away from me. So
I was talking to my cousin. I got a bunch of cousins, but I was talking to one of my cousins, and I have my earbud in and I'm outside. And so this is after a couple of conversations where he's like, are you going through a wind tunnel? So he's also long-winded. So I can mute him and like do a whole chore.
Yeah.
And so he's like, are you still there, or do you have me on mute? I'm like, you need to choose. I'm sweeping. Do you want to hear the background noise, or do you want to just trust that I'm still here? It's daytime hours. I've not fallen asleep. Don't worry.
Yeah, not yet. It's not past noon.
Hey.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So, keeping our garden running smoothly. That's on the topic for today. And I think it's really important because I don't know about you, Batavia, but have you gone through the garden and just, seems like sometimes you're just fighting yourself?
Never. I never experience it in the moment. I never realize it. But, I'll look back on last month and say, like, how did my garden become an uphill battle? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, too, with the gardening and stuff, and even homesteading, a lot of problems are compounded over time. So it's not something that pops up real quick, and it can kind of catch us by surprise. And I think I'm the same as you. I'll look back. I put in. Let me hold off on this story because it goes into one of the things on the list. But the biggest thing I think that I struggle with. Well, not actually, they're all the biggest, so I'm not even going to front. But one of the big things that I struggled with in the very beginning and moving forward, it seems to be getting better now, but it's growing what I and my family like to eat. When I first started gardening and I found the power of harvesting food, it felt to me like I had to grow every single thing. And that just, once I got that out of my system, things got a lot smoother. I think you may be dealing with something like that, like the transitional phase in your garden, are you not?
Yeah, I just got over that hump last week. Like, quite literally.
I mean, you said it on air, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I've been teasing at this like for most of this growing season, and it's interestingly enough, I don't feel like I'm stubborn. I don't need your feedback on this. I'd like to live in the moment of I don't feel like I'm stubborn. And interestingly enough, this year, some things not performing in the way that I wanted them to led me to realize, I'm kind of okay with not having it. And so then that led me, I was already on the idea of diverse garden, which means a lot of things in my mind, or at least it meant that. And then it was, the multiple years it took where you need to grow a number of plants to get the amount that you want. Peppers is a great example of that. You know, when I wanted my favorite, tomato pepper sauce, I need a bunch of red tomatoes. It doesn't count if I say I don't want to hear from you and then you write a note and put it up to the camera that says you are stubborn.
I didn't say it out loud, though. You just did that to yourself.
So I realized, like, okay, if I'm going to grow these peppers for the purpose of this particular recipe, I need like 10, 11 plants. That's a lot of plants, right? So anywho, I go down this road of the green beans over the years. We've talked about that. Like, how many green beans do you need to grow for it to be, worth your canning exercise, and so on and so forth. And so that, after I chased that for a few seasons and got the idea, now I'm able to, as of this last month or so, look back and say, planning for next year, right? And with the focus of hoping for a much smoother experience in my garden, there's some things I'm just okay with not growing.
Yeah.
Some things that I even like, because if I can let go of I'm not growing all of the things. It's not everything that I'm eating for the year from a produce perspective. Like, hard stop. That's not what's happening in my garden. So now I feel much more comfortable with picking and choosing things that I just know are better from my garden. There's a whole formula that I'm developing that will be patented. So stay tuned.
Well, I think first of all, I think it's very important to develop our own formulas for our gardens and, borrow pieces and parts from it. But, let me ask you this though. How are you in your tomato growing variety of varieties? How are you doing with that? Because I know that when we first met, it was absolutely out of control. So, and I know that tomatoes are one of those things that can be out of control for many, many people.
Yeah, I rolled my eyes because I'm looking at like very intentionally so you could see it. And my immediate thought was, it's only being tamed because I only have the land I have to grow on.
Right.
So I looked across at this lot that, the owner of the lot uses, and I'm friendly with them, I'm in this moment, I just realized, maybe I should chat about using some of his space. So anywho, I say all that to say, if I had more space, I would still be, and I'm talking about like if I had a whole nother lot, it would be a third of it would be tomatoes. And so I'd be right back where we were when I met you. Right. I've been forced into taming my love for growing tomatoes.
So you haven't changed anything. It's just you're limited.
I've decided to limit the amount of tomatoes that I'm growing because of the other things that I want to grow.
Yeah.
And I don't believe I'd grow somewhere between 15 and 20 tomato plants if I had the space, and then I was able to grow the other things that I'm looking to, and I'm looking at the next couple of years. I'm looking to grow over the next several seasons, garden years. But I'll cut that in half. It'll be more like 7 or 8 tomato plants, right? Which is still less than where we started. You and I started together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty deep when we first met. Yeah. So.
Well, there are a couple of reasons too. So, when you talk about like what the formula is, this is specific to tomatoes. Every variety isn't the same, right? As far as the production, as far as the taste. I grew a black strawberry this year, and it was a unique taste, but that size tomato, I don't know the official name of it. So it's larger than a cherry tomato. It's like almost like a salad sized tomato. So it's maybe the size of, $50, right? And so with that in mind, you got to be on top of harvesting them. They don't have the shelf life as long as, some of your other tomatoes. I find that they aren't as sweet as most times what you want from those when you harvest them at the blushing stage, like some of the other tomatoes. Again, this is my experience, my opinion. And so they are sometimes almost too prolific as well. Because what are you going to do with all those little bitty ass tomatoes?
Yeah.
And so I look at that and say, oh, I love to have a space in my garden every year to figure out, oh, this isn't necessarily the one, right? So what am I going to do with it is going to be the number one reason why I grow a tomato. Like, how am I going to utilize it? And then how much does it produce? Because most times when a tomato is prolific, it takes up the same space as a tomato plant that isn't.
Yeah, that's that's the daggone truth. I mean, it really and truly is. And it's hard too, because, and I get it. You know, you love growing tomatoes. You know, well, first of all, let me say this. I had a dream the other night. I dreamed about you, Batavia. I dreamed.
I get that a lot, believe it or not.
I know you do. I know you do. I know you do. It's hard for her to come in to record today because her head couldn't fit through the door, but she's got it. We got her in.
I have my hair pinned up on top, though. That's the reason why I could barely get the head set.
But I dreamed that that you had moved to North Carolina, and that we bought plots of land next to each other, not at our houses, but at we had individual farms. And I dreamed that we were testing different things, and you had a tomato farm. And, you know, and I don't remember anything after that, but I remember that it was like this whole thing that we had going on. It was pretty cool. And that's the thing too, is when we start getting into this, it's especially at first, you know, because we haven't even really and truly touched on spacing much, which is coming up in the future. But before you learn about spacing, you start cramming these plants in, and we start getting them all on top of each other. And we're growing green beans and spinach and lettuce and cabbage and eggplants and squash, and at the same time, not in the correct season, but all at the same time, you know, all in summertime, because we don't know what we're doing. And as we go through and you can start plucking it out. You know, I haven't grown an eggplant in 2 years. It just hasn't. I don't know, man. I just haven't been driven. You know what I mean? I grow my butternut squash every other year. You know, stuff like that. And when I started pulling stuff out, I got to a point where I was adding garden beds. I've got my 11 that I have now. And I got to a point, I remember one year I was planning it out, and I was like, I don't know what to plant in some of these areas. Like, I had some spaces that were almost needed to be emptied. And then I started changing the way I planted, and then that changed the game, where I was like, well, now I don't have enough to plant. So you're raising your hand. Why is that? Is
that my hair, or is that that's a plant behind me? Come on, somebody.
I mean, I remember looking at the planter app and filling it in and thinking, okay, what else am I going to plant? I was like, I don't know what else I'm going to plant. And then I started digging in, thinking like, well, what else could I plant? And, you know, I've grown stuff like chard and all that. But, I mean, truth be told, when it comes down to it, I have never walked in my house and been like, you know what, I think I want some chard tonight. I've just never thought that. You know, same with beets. I've never come in and been like, you know what, I think it's time to have some beets. Today is the day. I've never had that. And so why would I plant that in my garden? Because I can. I mean, that's a good reason, I guess, but in the production side of things and being productive, it doesn't really work out well. So, you know, as I've narrowed down what I grow now, I'm very happy with the amounts that I'm getting out of my garden. And I'd like to think that I can kind of get my garden to produce like it's coming out of a bigger garden. You know what I mean? Because I'm getting the stuff that I'm eating into the house, which eliminates stuff that we've had people. We did a whole show about not harvesting stuff out of your garden. Well, maybe we're not harvesting it because we really don't want to eat it. You know what I mean? Like deep down inside, you're like, you know, I don't really feel like eating kale. You know, when I grew that curly kale, I didn't care nothing about it. I didn't want to look at it, didn't want to see it, didn't want to harvest it, didn't want to eat it, nothing. But then when I started growing, what is it, the lacinato kales is what it's called? Yeah. Totally different. I was able to get in there and I enjoyed them more. You know what I mean? And I'm going to be truthful with you. There's a lot of vegetables that I eat that I force myself to eat them because I know I need to eat my vegetables. You know what I mean? Like I don't necessarily desire to eat a lot of them, but you know, that's just how it is. So definitely want to focus on what we want to grow or consume.
I think that that when you think about, you know, I like the exercise of I've never woke up and say, you know what I have a hankering for? Beets. And I think that what I've experienced over the last several years is trying to determine what grows well in my area, what I as a gardener grow well, like what can I really have a good experience raising in my garden. And that influences what I grow. But what it doesn't need to do is lead to me growing a whole bed of a thing, right? I think that every several seasons that may shift. So one of the revelations was this year's cabbage sucked. I actually have a pretty long list of womps when it comes to particular vegetables that I planted, and I have some reasons why, but I was okay with not having dozens of cabbage. You know why? We'll talk about that on another episode. No, seriousness. It's the, you know, not having it in my garden led me to realize I do like cabbage. I enjoy them. You know, I think that they fit, you know, check off the list of they can be refrigerated for a long period of time. With the exception, the only downside for me is the cabbage butterfly, which means that it added to the list of things that I choose to cover as a method to manage against the pest. And that's, you know, the less I could have of that, the better. But again, that's on the list. But I also realized that it's generally a longer growing crop from seed to maturity. And I look at it and say, like, how many do I need to be satisfied? Like, I'd love to have a few in the spring and a few in the fall and call it a wrap, you know? And so when I think about that's where I am. I think I've had probably as much as like 6 or 8 across a season, and generally have been happy with that. But I'm also okay with not having. I mean, I had like 2 regular kind of green/white heads of cabbage this year, and I was just like, oh, all right, you know. So I think you go through. For me, if I didn't grow cabbage, I would probably. My uncle cooks a mean pot of cabbage, like steamed cabbage. And I'd probably have them when he brings me a plate around the holidays. And that'd be it. Yeah. If I go to a Jamaican spot for some takeout, you know, that's a common side, right? That's when I'd have it. I wouldn't purchase it from the store to cook it. And so I look at a number of vegetables in that way, because we talked about this years ago, where like our routines for most of our diets are pretty much the same foods over and over and over again. Yeah. So growing cabbage allows me to insert that level of diversity in my diet, not just my garden. Yeah. But I don't need 20 of them.
No, but you know, I do. And so everybody's individual, different. And I mean, the thing is growing things in your garden, we've got to move on, but growing certain foods in your garden.
I like it here.
Can introduce you to ways to eat other things if you're willing to accept that into your life. Okay. So the next one is, and this one seems really basic, but I struggle super hard. And it's water needs to be very close to your garden. You need to have readily accessible water. I put my garden in the back of my house, in the back of my property, with no water anywhere near it, thinking I was going to run a hose. Very difficult. I struggled for a long time. And I shoot myself that I did not put the irrigation in earlier. I just didn't know about the system until recently. But once I did that, it changed the game. But I still struggle with it because I lose so much water pressure pushing water back there. And I could put a faucet in, but it's going to cost me $1,500 to do that, and to run water back there. So I kind of stepped back from that. But I did this with mushrooms. Remember when I tried to grow mushrooms? The only reason why I was not successful and could not keep up is because I did not have water readily available, and so I never watered the mushrooms. That was the problem I had. So everything else I did right. I set it up good, and then it got dry, and I could not keep up with it. Watering is really important, but I don't want people to fight themselves having to water, you know?
Yeah, for me, I'm still hand watering everything. And this year probably was the more challenging because life was more challenging. And so the timing, the consistency of watering, I don't think that it necessarily negatively impacted my harvest. We'll find that my biggest concern is going to be the sweet potatoes. While they don't need to be, constantly wet, they have been on their own. And then we got 5 inches of rain across a week. And I'm worried about, them splitting because they were at the later part of their growth and they had been without water consistently for quite a while. But we'll see. We'll probably see around this episode airing. Ooh. Yeah.
Almost
I'll be
time?
pulling them up then. Yeah, it'll be time by then. I'll be headed towards my first frost. Average first frost. So a lot of y'all know that I have water by hand. It's a 125 feet by 25 feet. 125 feet by 25 feet plot is what my home is on. And that includes the house, the garage, and all of that. So I don't have a long stretch, from the front yard to the backyard. But I was watching, I'm pretty sure I got this hose this year or last year, and dragging it back and forth on the concrete, I can see where it's peeling away. And I'm just are you telling me I'm replacing hoses every year now? And so one of the notes here is invest in a quality hose. And now I'm oh, let me go back. I think that was kind of the mid-grade hose that I bought, and I may be paying for it quite literally.
Yeah.
It's still enough time in the season if I bought it this season to take it back.
Well, I will say this. If you're going to put money into a garden, I think your irrigation should be the place. And I will say this, if you're moving hoses around and stuff like that, industrial grade hoses is what you want to get. Mm-hmm. Something, they usually are red rubber, and they last a long time. They're easy to coil up. They don't kink really, nothing. You got to spend for it. I ran mine underground, which was kind of a pain in the butt, but I did that for a number of reasons. One, I got tired of tripping over hoses and moving them when I was cutting grass and stuff like that. But, it's easy when we're putting in a garden bed, and we went in, so we have an honorable mention at the end. But this one, we understand that the people listening to this episode have already got your gardens in place, and the chances of you moving it closer to a faucet is not really a thing. You know what I mean? It's a difficult process. And a lot of us have put a lot of time and effort cultivating our soil, building it up and all that. And doing so, you don't just scrap that and say, well, I need to be closer to this, but getting your stuff, getting it straight and using this time of the year. Look, you're still going to get warm days, so you can futz with the water a little bit and you can move it around and figure it out. I was trying to do mine with overhead sprinklers before, and I would legit, especially this time of year, I would sit back and say, okay, what struggled? And it was always the water, always, every single time. This part's not getting water. This isn't getting water. I'm watering too much here. There's a whole industry for farms to find hot spots, high spots where they don't get a lot of water. And I would go out there in my bathing suit and just get sprayed in the face by the sprinkler over and over until I tweaked it the way I wanted it. And then spring would come, and then it would be well, that wasn't enough, and I could never, ever, ever get it enough. That was just I don't know what it was. It was just frustrating. So, it's one of those things. And, I will say drip irrigation is the way to go. But I couldn't imagine hand watering. That would drive me insane. I just don't have enough time for that.
Yeah, I think, and our climates are different too.
Yeah.
So the requirement, how often you hand water, you'd be hand watering much more often than I do. It did test my patience this year. So a lot of us, and it's a nice note that a lot of us already have our gardens in place. And so like the relocation of things is probably not on the top list to do, but it's still a nice nudge to perhaps if you have been thinking about drip irrigation, you know, some of us aren't in our forever gardens, right? You know, once you compensate for a thing, sometimes you forget that the thing is really an issue.
Yeah.
Right. You know, so you've been working at this and you now you have a system in place when it comes to watering, but it's really not, I mean, there's a lot of friction there.
Yeah.
But you've just overcome it. But that doesn't mean that that's ideal.
No.
And it doesn't mean that you can't have an ideal plan or a place or a system in the future. Right. You know, so take this as your friendly reminder. Think about your watering strategy.
Well, the thing, too, is if you're somewhere that you're going to be for a while, and let's say you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s, and you're like, I'm going to move buckets of water back here. That's not going to last forever. You know, and it's great exercise, you know, whatever, but eventually it's going to get harder for you. And so thinking about that in the future and starting to kind of tweak it a little bit more, because again, I looked at it this way. If I was, you know, all the time I spent messing with my irrigation, I could have been doing something else more productive in my garden. I could be weeding. I could be turning compost. I could be starting seeds. I could be harvesting, stuff like that. And so by automating it a little bit more, making it easier, it has definitely helped me progress in my garden in a positive way. So, you know, just make sure that you're pretty close, you know, to a water source. You're comfortable with what you're using. And I will say this, don't go to your local Dollar Tree and buy a hose. You know, if you need something in a pinch, fine. But I'll tell you this, those cheap hoses, when you have to repair them, it is a pain in the butt to repair them. You get a nice expensive hose and you accidentally cut it, you can go ahead and you can slide a fitting in there and it's a lot easier. It's just the materials are better. And it's a hard pill to swallow. You know what I mean?
Also, don't go cheap on your hose nozzles. Like if you're, you know, spraying. I pulled into on the front of the house and I don't know where I was going. Oh, I was picking up my mom and I knew we were going to go to the store. So I was trying to clear out my truck. And so I had a case of water, 40 bottles. Did the math. That's 5 gallons. I carried it. Now I was under the weather, so I just wasn't really feeling the best. But I carried it from the trunk to the front door and literally stopped at the front door and said, I don't know how many more I have of this in me. Like, and I wasn't talking about I had one more, you know, package to pull in, but I just meant like, I don't know how much more in my future am I going to be able to bring in these big old, you know, jugs of water. And obviously 5 gallons is something that I work with containers all the time, 5-gallon buckets. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 5-gallon bucket crew here. You know, we're not, everybody knows that. So the next two we're going to combine together. And so good soil. And then along with good soil is amending your soil. I argue that gardening.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.
Is not necessarily growing plants, it's maintaining soil. And the plants and the harvest is the outcome of that. What do you think?
I'd agree. And it took me some time to kind of focus on that. The soil dump that I got in 2019, which was for like, I am digging up the front yard and I'm going to have a front yard garden. That soil is very unique in my garden. Like those 2 10 by 3.5 feet beds. I always forget which way you're supposed to do it, the width by the length.
Doesn't
but
matter.
Anyway, yeah, I think you guys know that I don't have a 10-foot wide bed, but so those two beds, the soil is basically identical. Very, very easy to dry. I've produced quite a bit of food in them, but not very pliable. Also not sandy at the same time. Like if I don't keep it covered, even if I do with mulch over the season, and I'll show you a picture or a short video, my friend, of it. Like I need a pickaxe to break that soil up right now, you know, and I look at it and say that I've not really focused my energy on improving the soil, right? I have done the standard. All right, I'm going to add a couple of bags of compost. I'm going to cover it in the last couple of seasons with some leaves and it'll be fine, right?
Has it gotten better? Has it gotten better?
No, but I've not been consistent in I think this is the 6th season. Yeah, this is the 6th year that I've grown in it. Because I didn't realize in the first couple of seasons, like when I put the soil in, because think about it, the soil drop was 3 doors down. I had a wheelbarrow, my version of one. By the time I got to the top of the beds, I was at the bottom of the soil drop. Yeah. So the soil got worse as I dug down. And that ended up being what I'm primarily growing in. You know, and so the very last of the soil is in the backyard in a 4x4 foot bed. And I've worked to improve that soil, just, you know, maybe smaller space, easier to manage. It's much better quality over the, you know, years now than in the front yard garden. So I say all of that to say it's still growing food, right? You know, but it's at a place where I need to focus my attention on it just to, to be a steward of the garden.
Yeah. And I mean, good soil is, there's a lot to good soil. It's nutrients, it's drainage, it's, you know, the structure of the soil. And when you have bad soil, if you start off with bad soil, it's incredibly difficult to get it better. The best way to do it is start off with a decent soil and stay on top of it. And this is where, you know, this is why I combine, because amending is a big part of it. Compost. You can grow in compost, but you're not going to get the same benefit as if you had soil and compost mixed together. You know, Batavia is always talking about getting leaves from people and stuff like that. Like, that's a great way to do it. Manure, anything that adds decomposing matter back into the garden. But the problem is, we as gardeners know that compost is black gold. It is the most important thing, right? That's what we think. So what do? We add more and more and more. But as that compost starts to break down, when you look at your garden, you'll start to see a crumbly texture. Well, that's because there's no soil anymore. It's just decomposing matter. So we want to be adding soil. We want to be adding compost. We want to be, you know, there's a whole no-till world out there, and I'm not totally in that ballpark. I like a little bit of till because you can pull that soil back up and remix it a little bit. You know, you don't have to do hardcore tilling, but it's good to get a little bit of mixing going on because you can pull the soil from the bottom to the top, set it on top of that decomposing matter. It will then, again, because whatever's on the surface is going to dry out, right? Unless we mulch it, which mulching is part of this. But once we do that, that stuff at the bottom, that decomposing matter that was at the top is going to stay wet and it's going to start to break down faster. And so instead of just, you know, if you've ever had a compost pile and you're like, hey, I'm just going to cold compost, I'm not going to turn it. It'll take years to turn it into compost. But if you turn it, it can be a month, 2 months, if you do it enough to where you can actually get compost made. So it's the same idea, you know, and it's not like you got to go out there and be like, all right, I got to till around my plants. It's like, hey, you pull everything out of the garden, go ahead and mix up the soil. Go ahead and put in your leaf mold, your manure, your compost, your nutrients, you know, your matters, stuff like that, and let it break down. Let it take time. I just added a trailer full of horse manure out in my side yard, and it's just going to sit for the whole winter. The only thing I'm going to do next is I'm going to go out there and I'm going to cover it with straw so that it will stay moist and it will break down faster. That's the only thing I'm going to do. But we've got months to get that all situated. And so, like, when we come into this time period, that's like, hey, it's cooling off. My plants are going. I'm not producing as much. I'm going to take time off. This is really like the last push and what will set you forward into your garden next year, because all of that manure will break down over the winter. And then when we goes to planting it again, we have supercharged soil ready to go.
Supercharged soil.
You like that, don't you?
It's like from Marvel or something.
So, I mean, good soil is really important. Fertilizing is part of it. I'm a big proponent of organic fertilizers because they feed the soil. I got a gentleman commented on my YouTube channel the other day, Sandy Bottom Homestead, and I liked what he said. He was like, I use organic and synthetic. He's like, I use the organic fertilizer to feed the soil, and I use the synthetic to feed the plants. And I was, I really like that that approach. And I've said this a lot. I don't like the idea of like, this is how I garden. This is the only way I do it. It's like amending your garden plan for yourself and using everything we have available to us. And so I think that was a really good way because, we know that those organic fertilizers will feed the soil, will break down, feed that microbiology, which will in turn feed the plant. But if you need a quick boost, shoot it a little bit of the synthetic and get it going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then I think also let's not leave out the idea of keeping track of what you've been growing in those spaces, right? Because different plants are taking different nutrients from the soil, so year by year, what have you been growing? And I mean, I'm not one to keep, super detailed notes. I'm more of the, when I'm moving crops around, it's more of kind of do no harm.
Right.
Trying to outrun disease, more than anything, but there is also, for this one bed in particular, what have I grown in the bed and what have been my mulch and watering practices. Like those things combined, I think matter for a particular space. This is a space that's exposed, the most probably in the garden to sun throughout the year as well.
Yeah.
So there's that to consider. They're in the meadow beds, and there's another garden bed that's smaller, same metal bed. So it's not that, because that soil makeup is different compared to the other two. And the soil makeup that went into it was different, and the soil makeup today is different. And so I go back to the original soil dump. But it's something that I have on my list, right? And I'll continue to, tweak.
Yeah. Now, if you have bad soil, first of all, the power of mulch is unbelievable. Batavia just said she's got a section of her garden that gets all the sun. That mulch will help with that, not drying out the soil and stuff like that. So pick your best mulch that you want to use and go for it. And
that actual bed doesn't have any mulch left either.
Yeah.
And that's shame on me. Right. And so in my mind, it's I'm going to work that bed up a little bit more, and I'm going to go ahead and get, as I put it to bed for the year, like that's my plan. But it's sitting exposed. It's been weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks that it's been sitting and exposed. And that doesn't do it any favors. You know?
And winter time is a great time for that because, I mean, you let it work itself.
Yeah. Especially for a place like for me that I'll get snow. So that additional moisture, the idea is that's going to help this soil coming into the spring. So again, I'll be fine. I mean, I wouldn't even consider it bad soil necessarily, but it's not the best soil in my garden. It's not the, healthiest, for lack of a better term, garden beds in my garden.
Well, I got in the wild garden that's being moved, I had gotten some soil that I consider bad soil. It was compacted. And then I did some things. I mulched. I put some stuff in it. I put some more topsoil in it. I turned it and tilled it. And, at this point, it's about, and this is about over, I'd say 2 years of working it. It's about 50% right. That being, with that being said, it's kind of, I'm pulling the plug on the garden beds itself. And I don't feel bad about it, but the effort was put in there, and it definitely, we made a difference in it, and it was a good experience. But I wanted, I didn't want to pull the soil out. I can get things to grow in it, but I don't want to focus my energy planting vegetables in an area that's just not going to grow well. And I mulched it and added, and I did all those things to it, and it's getting into the right space, but it's just not quite there. So we're going to move on. And, this is where like cover crops can also be added in, to break up the soil, to feed the soil, to add green manure. Green manure is just plant matter that breaks down, adds nitrogen back in. All these things you can do. There's so many different things that we can add into our garden beds to amend the soil, to in turn give us good soil, so we can have, because the problem with it is you can't see what's going on in the soil. So you don't really know what's going on. The only thing we can do with our eyes is say, is the structure of the soil okay? And are we giving it enough nutrients and stuff to continue to do what it needs to do? That's the only thing other than that, you got to get a soil test and go from there. And typically speaking, a soil test is not going to give you a quick fix either. It's just going to tell you like, hey, add more of this, add this fertilizer in. A lot of them are quick fixes. A lot of them, it comes down to mulching, compost, manure, stuff like that, and turning the soil over. Okay. Another one that's really important, you're going to hear more about this in the future too, is we want to choose varieties that will mature in your growing season. So Batavia just said that she's about to harvest her sweet potatoes. She's pushing the envelope on them. She's going to get them, but the question becomes, are there other options that we can use? There's not another vegetable that I can think of that would mimic a sweet potato as far as flavor and as far as stuff we want to do with it. But when it comes down to squashes and stuff like that, there's a lot of different varieties that we can pick and choose from that will produce in the time frame you have in your garden.
Which one are we on now where you're questioning my sweet potato growing?
No, you have mentioned it many times.
So there are a few crops, sweet potatoes, melons, winter squash, that are on my, do I really have the heat, right? Are my hot days hot enough? And do I have enough of them? Right. So 100+ day crop like sweet potatoes that I am planting in June, because that's where we're consistently getting above 50 degrees. I think that I could plant, and I hate to be a glutton for punishment and beat myself up on this. I think I can plant my winter squash a bit earlier, but I feel pretty strong about I'm getting the sweet potatoes out as early as possible. I've seen the damage to sweet potatoes in May. Now there may be some Chicagoans, that are planting them earlier. And if you are, DM me, talk to me about when and how successful you are. Cause I still have a theory of, even if I did plant them May 20th and they survived, when are they starting to take off? When is that growth really starting to happen? And so I don't have the numbers here of when I planted out my sweet potatoes, but there is something to be said about I'm probably nearing the 100 days, and I have to get to them before the bugs start to get to them, which means a lot of times that they're more mature than they really need to be under the soil. I was thinking about this morning. like kind of random ideas about where to plot my sweet potatoes next year. And I'm really going to wait until this year's harvest to determine it. But when I said, oh, maybe I'll plant them in this set of beds, I immediately thought, that's it for the season. Like, I am dedicating this set of beds to the sweet potatoes, like hard stop. So, I mean, you do have a point. The honey nut squash is similar. I won't make a pie out of it, but it's like kind of similar to me when it comes to the sweetness. So
Right.
there's that, but it's still a long crop too.
Well, so sweet potatoes, I just looked it up. Production by state is leading North Carolina, then California, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. So all of those have long, warm growing seasons. And it's important that we think about this too. Look, you have 100 days of frost-free days. Plus, how many frost-free days do you have? Do you know?
I think it's 100 and like just under 200, 190 something.
Right. But of those 109, let's call it 200. Of those 200 frost-free days, how many of those days are actually conducive to sweet potato growth? Right? Just like for me and broccoli, we've got 200 and 60, 70 days of frost-free. And of those days, we have a very small amount that are conducive to it. Now, the benefit of broccoli and, the cool season crops that we're planting now is that they can handle and they like the cooler weather. So we can kind of cruise through a little bit. But if you're talking in between, the actual growing season, last frost to first frost, you're missing a big portion of it because I don't have a great season for it. I looked it up in Illinois. The main crops for Illinois, which, these are all for farms, are soybean, corns, and pumpkins. Apparently pumpkins grow really good in Illinois. Don't know why, but that could be something.
That's a longer season crop too, isn't it? I've never grown pumpkins.
It may be a longer season crop, but it may be that the weather is better for it, right? So, there's others.
Are pumpkins considered a winter
Squash?
Yeah, they're squash, right? Technically?
Well, I don't know. Somebody's going to probably email us and tell us, which is fine, but
Leonard?
yeah, Leonard ain't going to help us there. I don't know. I know I grow Seminole pumpkins, which look like a pumpkin, but they resemble a squash more so than an actual pumpkin does. So, I don't know. But
and they're harvested green, I think I saw. Greenish.
What are Seminole pumpkins?
Your Seminole pumpkins.
Yeah. They don't turn... they'll end up turning colors, but they don't really turn colors like that. So, when you're planting your garden, though, and this kind of goes back in line with like what your family likes to eat, we have to remember that just because you can buy it in the grocery store doesn't mean you can grow it in your area, or you should grow it. And what that really comes down to is you can grow it, but you're not going to get the production that you could possibly get somewhere else, and your efforts may be better focused in other areas. Now, Batavia grows sweet potatoes. Look, I don't think she should be growing them in Illinois, but if she wants to grow them and she's happy with what she's getting out of the effort, then by all means, you do it. You know what I mean? And when I say I don't think you should be doing it, it comes out a lot worse than I mean. It's like, I don't think it's the optimum crop. I've told you, and I think you're starting to see, like, cabbages grow really well in your area. Like, you were harvesting them in, like, July, right?
You see, he's trying to soften this thing here.
No.
Because not only did he say he put a big fat X on my sweet potato growing, then he basically said, I've told you what grows well. And let me give you the example of, you saw that you had, cabbage in July. In all seriousness, my grandparents, God rest their soul, would agree with you.
Oh, really?
You know that girl's growing sweet potatoes. Why would she be growing sweet potatoes?
Well, how much space do you give to your sweet potatoes?
How much what?
How much space do you give to them?
This year I did a 4-foot bed by 12 feet, and I probably planted it up to like maybe 8 by 4 or something. I know for sure I've never really given sweet potatoes and potatoes are two sets of crops that I really want to do well, but I've never really given them the space I've already learned that they need. Like I try to cheat the system with both of those crops, kind of squeeze them in. Excuse me. So the sweet potatoes, I know I am pushing the envelope. So this banter is real banter. Like, I'm not offended at all. Like, if I were advising somebody in Chicago, I'd give the cons of growing sweet potatoes, you know. Melons is another one. I am still, shout out to the Purple Thumb gardener who's in Philadelphia, and I feel like we have similar weather. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to have to pull it up on time and date past weather. She grows kick butt melons, like watermelons, like huge watermelons. And I just haven't stopped to say, all right, girl, tell me when you start them, tell me when you're planting them, you know, and so on, because I feel like if I just mimic what she does, I'd probably have better success. But I also believe my grandparents, God rest their soul, I started growing these things after they had passed on, would say, girl, wait, hold on. You know that girl is trying to grow melons. What kind of melons? Watermelons? Yeah, watermelons. Now, where would she get an idea like that?
So if I can turn it on myself, I would say I have no business growing Brussels sprouts. None whatsoever.
Yeah, I've about given up on Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, I haven't, and I won't. I mean, I got a full bed planted of them. But I just, you know, it's one of those things. Like, I understand the challenges. Like, I went into it, and my state extension was like, you can have a good year, you can have a bad year. You know, it's not a definite in North Carolina. And I'm like, it's fine. I like them. I want them. I'm doing this. And it's one of those things, like, if I eliminated it from my garden, I'd probably have so much of an easier time. But it's like you, I really enjoy them. I'm not going to get the amount of Brussels sprouts that you're going to get because my climate's not conducive to it. But I'm willing to take that chance. And I think that we all need to have that experience too. I mean, it took me 5 years to get a Brussels sprout to eat. You know what I mean? Was it 5 or 4 years? It was a few years. And so it took me that long. And then I just said, I'm going to do it again. Knowing that it could be either or. Like, it's clearly states Brussels sprouts do not always grow well in North Carolina. In scene. Like, that's it. So I knew that going into it. I just pulled up a thing here, and I Googled Illinois best garden crops, and I just got like a list. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but 90% of it is all like greens and asparagus does really good there apparently. But tomatoes, bell peppers, eggplants, and squash all popped up on there too. So
there's something about and I live in those kinds of lists.
Yeah.
Right. I live in the recommendations. Like, my starting point is what is recommended in Illinois. Well, that's not exactly true. My starting point is I love to grow sweet potatoes, and then looking up, you know, recommendations around it. And there are a lot of things that just won't plainly say, like, I live in, like, you know, Farmer's Almanac, Illinois Extension Service. They rarely say, nope, don't even try it. They'll give you the struggles you may have with it. And so sweet potatoes, I think are super cool.
Yeah,
right.
They
you know,
are.
and so, and it's a kind of almost, well, we'll see if do nothing really works. You know, because I did nothing with them this year. It's almost like a do nothing kind of crop. And I feel like it's a good use of space. So I think the exercise, and we spend a lot of time on sweet potatoes in my garden, but I think it's super important. Going back years ago when I first joined the podcast, thank you for the invitation. I was really, really focused on protecting gardeners from themselves. And then I realized I had to get out of their way and let them figure it out themselves. But my starting point before I plant a crop, I may have the idea of wanting to grow it. How does it do in my area? And then I make a decision around, am I going to push the envelope, recognizing that I may not get the kind of harvest that Young Ben does in North Carolina for sweet potatoes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. But let me see what I can get from it. And you can apply that to a number of different crops. I've watched some Minnesota gardeners. I don't know them personally, but they talk about things like, or people, in certain parts of Canada, they talk about things like challenges they have growing tomatoes, and my heart aches for them. But it's absolutely based on how cold it stays in the spring going into summer, and then how quickly it gets cold again coming from summer into, into fall. And then how their temperature kind of lies during the summer season. So one of the reasons I think Illinois, you look at something like some of these greens, and it's that sweet spot, no pun intended, around, it's not super hot. It's hot enough to grow some summer crops like tomatoes and peppers, but not so hot where something like collards and kale is completely fry.
Yeah.
They don't thrive necessarily. They still like it cooler.
Right.
That's the plant, but.
That's how it is here. I mean, it just completely fries. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things too. Look, I gotta, when we get off here, we need to have a talk about something that I'm doing and see what you think. But, I will say you've got to plant at the right time. I want to fit, we had an honorable mention, but I'm going to skip it. Because we're going over. But you got to plant at the right time. There is never a time when you need to plant cabbage and tomatoes at the same time. Never. Okay? I mean, you need to separate those by months. So just remember that as you go forward, because you're fighting an uphill battle. Your garden's going to struggle. And when you step back, you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, what's going on? Why do I have crop failure here? Why do I have, big giant gaps here and there and wasted space and all that? I mean, a garden is supposed to be a place of beauty and production. It's a very weird dynamic. And so we can do both of those, but we just got to plan it all out and do it at the right time. And so when we do that, I mean, we use the Planter app for that. That helps us plan everything out visually. It helps us with our crop rotation, which, by the way, I saw something. I got to send it to you, Batavia. Very interesting about crop rotation. They're doing a study on it, and they're starting to find a couple things out that are very, very interesting. So
I'm all ears, brother.
Yeah. Well, it's the article looked like it was going to be super long and in depth, and it
technical,
was one paragraph, but it was actually my kind of article, because I'm like, cool, okay, I got the results, you know what I mean, or like the working results. But using the Planter app for your crop rotation and your planning of each one, because it gives you a little graph if you go into each variety and tell you the planting dates for your area and the growing seasons. And so you can use all of that to your advantage. So check out the Planter app, use the link below, get yourself a discount. You can use it on the Apple, Google store, or you get it from the Apple and Google Play store, and you can use it on your phone, PC, or tablet. But that's something that we use a lot, and it's for this exact reason, because once we got our timings down, everything starts to get easier. Some of us are working on our timings more than others, but even still, even little steps. I mean, have you noticed changes in your garden since you were changing your timing a little bit, Batavia?
Yes, I have.
You have? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember last year. I saw you on one of your videos pull up a carrot, and I wanted to jump through the screen and choke you, because it was the most beautiful carrot I have ever seen. It was just like a magical carrot. And you don't get that when you plant it at the wrong date. You just don't. You know what I mean? Like, you planted that carrot at the perfect time and grew it in the perfect way, in the perfect combination. You had it next to your cabbages, right? Do I remember correctly?
Yeah, I did. And I have that carrot still. It's framed over my mantle.
Yeah.
What's the name of that? Like what they do with animals, like they taxidermy.
Yeah,
I did that with my carrot.
Yeah, it was
guys.
But when you get that experience and you pull that up and you're like, this is perfect. You know, that first year I grew sweet potatoes and I pulled out 40 pounds, I said, this is perfect. Like, you did it right, buddy. And then I went and I looked at my Brussels sprouts and they looked pitiful and they were full of disease and just horrible. And I was like, this is not perfect. So, you know, once you start noticing that in each individual group, then you know, like, hey, this is when I'm going to plant, and you go good from there.
You deserve as a gardener to have some easy things. So if you're in a fight with Brussels sprouts, young Ben, and if I'm going to say, all right, 99 days has to be good enough for my sweet potatoes, like pull them out, right? I need to have something that is easier, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm glad you reminded me of those carrots, because it's such a great example of, after I got past the part of direct sowing, thinning, I literally was done. Like, I just waited. You know, I kept them watered and everything. And mind you, these were carrots growing on my concrete patio, the raised bed. Basically, it's just framing the soil, as young Ben has, you know, decided to determine that a big old container, you know. And so what was it like? We determined it was less than 10 inches of soil by the time things were pulled. Yeah. Like, that was easy. Go for some of those easy wins, which, you know, who would have ever thought carrots were easy? It's all about the timing of it. That soil was damp. The air was cool when I sowed them. They must have went in like in April or something.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, you have to continue to start to work at that. And I'm speaking of future Batavia, fight the urge to give in to being tired. Fight the urge to give in to the, okay, maybe later, you know?
Yeah. I mean, look, I was telling my son the other day, I said, you know, there's times, I asked him, I was like, you know, in the spring, will you help me more in the garden? Because there's times when I'm out in the garden until 9 o'clock at night planting, and it's just, it you know, it's exhausting, but that's how you meet your deadline, you know, because, I mean, let's face it, you got a deadline, and you may not have an opportunity the next day. You may only be able to plant on Saturdays, you know, really focus. So, you know, those are the times where it's like, look, I gotta push through. I gotta do this. And then by handling it that way, you can kind of meet these deadlines and get these things in the ground on time. And it is a mad dash. And when I learned that not everything had to go in at once, it changed the game, because instead of being out there till 9 o'clock at night, I was out there till 7 o'clock, you know, and I had to do it half as much because the garden was in full rotation doing its thing. You know, like this fall when I planted my garden, it was a very slow burn. It was, I planted one bed one week, I planted another bed another week, I planted another bed another week. You know, I did stuff like that. So it wasn't terrible. So, and I do want to say before we go to the listener question, you know, I can hear somebody, been so mean to Batavia, this, that, and the other. Well, this is for the purpose of the show. And remember, we all grow our gardens the way we want. We may not agree with how other people are doing it, but it's your garden and you do what you want. And so I respect Batavia's tenacity to keep growing sweet potatoes. It's something to be admired, because it's just like with my Brussels sprouts, like, you're just determined. And I think it's cool because you're going to figure out a way to keep it going. And I will say that a little bit of black plastic in the spring can warm that soil right up enough for them.
I've actually read comments around kind of our interactions, and I'm a big girl. Bigger than years before, but I'm a big girl. And there may have been 1 or 2 episodes that we may have even pulled where I said something that just really came off flat and mean, and the reverse happened. Yeah. And so if I am in the middle of an episode, I just feel like it's not it, right? Because I'm protective of young Ben and the perception of him, specifically when it comes to me, right? You know, it starts with the world, but specifically when it comes to me. So I appreciate, you know, the gesture, but I feel pretty good about nah, man, that's not the way that.
Yeah.
And it's been years that I felt like I had to say, hold on, horsey, and so, and again, it has been the other way. Sometimes I think I'm super duper clever and I listen back and it's like, And also, just again, this is,
Does that happen much?
Does that happen much? Yeah, right. We probably should have done this on our subscription episode instead, where we get a little bit more raw, a little bit more real. But as you all can hear, he directs the episodes. So I am following his lead in the conversation. And we covered at the top, I could go long, and so sometimes he has to pull it back around. And sometimes I don't care, right?
But you know what I love about you, Batavia, is I'll try to like pull us into the next portion of it. And you'll be like, hold on, I'm not done yet. I'm like, well, dang, I've been sitting here for like 10 minutes.
I don't like the attitude and that, replication of what I do there, because it's not that. It's real smooth and caring. Hold on, dear son. I'm not done yet. I'd like to take more care with this topic.
Okay, Pinocchio.
We're going back to the OG 90-minute episodes now. All right, let's get to this.
Let's get to this question. All right, so look. We've got question. So this comes from our Facebook group, Backyard Gardens Community Garden. And we have, here we go. Kimberly wants to know when to harvest peppers and tomatoes, when the night's below 40, or can I wait until we are expecting an actual freeze?
Hey, Kimberly. Get him out your garden, girl. So old Batavia would say, wait until the very last minute. I've harvested peppers and tomatoes out of my garden as, snow flurries are coming down and we're expecting a frost. Like I've basically harvested them to my floodlight, in my garage. It's just a stressor, and so unnecessary stressor. I did a round of harvesting, early in October. And I'm thinking that I'll probably have literally a handful of peppers in, just because I'm using it as a refrigerator. Peppers do better for me, staying in the garden. Tomatoes start to change for me. If it's under 40 degrees and they're still on the vine, they're not ripening. One. Yeah. Two, there's distress on the actual tomato plants. I pulled some tomatoes in October and there was some scarring on them, and it's just based on the weather conditions and the shift. And so, yes, you can wait until just before your frost to harvest them, to answer you directly. Would I recommend it? If you have a plan for what you're going to do with them, I'd say get them out sooner.
I will say this. If you don't harvest them, God's going to harvest them for you, because they're just going to fall right off the plant. Mm-hmm. That's happened to me. I'd go out there and it was just like constant drop. Yeah, so I agree with Batavia. Question I have for you, though, is why are you worried about stressing the plant when it's going to die soon anyways?
No, stress on the actual tomatoes. So like It's visible. You could see the tomatoes. Have you ever gone to like a farmer's market and you see like the last of the crops?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, they change. Their appearance is much different. I mean, it's like I get darker greens, and I definitely get more, like you said, scarring. So, yeah, I would say pull them. Don't leave them on there.
And to be fair, if you have the time, right? So the harvesting the vegetables is not the biggest time, spend. It's really what you're doing with them. Like I have some peppers right now that I'm on day 2. They were pulled off the vine, and I always have the best laid plans. I need to get them in the refrigerator. I'm not going to get them cut up and frozen like I want to. Put them in the refrigerator, buy myself a little bit more time. So
that it?
Because
you stopped short.
Yeah, no, I'm on the tail end of that cold I had, so I'm getting a little foggy in my head. But before we wrap and before you take us out, I want to make a note that this episode, like, it pops up at like 3 a.m. So I want to put this into the universe and say happy birthday to my mom. It's her 70th birthday. I will speak to her in a few hours from when this is released, but I'm going to put that into the universe.
Does she listen?
No, of course not. Does she listen to me on the radio? No.
Yeah.
I'm putting it into the universe.
Well, I was going to say happy birthday to Mom, but happy birthday, Mom. You have to just send her that one clip. How's that?
Yeah, I will. Oh, that's a good idea.
Maybe then she'll start to listen. So, yeah, my mom doesn't listen either, and she gardens. Go figure. She's like, well, just tell me what to do. No, listen, there's hours and hours and hours. There's like 400 hours of me telling you what to do. Gosh. But everybody, that's how you make your garden easier to grow. So don't fight yourself. Batavia's going to keep growing sweet potatoes. I'm going to keep growing Brussels sprouts. That's just the way it is, people. And we love y'all. Keep up the good work. Stay strong. Don't forget, movie next week, Hold Your Breath, Hulu. Check it out. Decent movie. But we'll talk about the concepts behind the Dust Bowl. It really did put it into perspective, though, for me. So maybe it'll help you guys with the same. I know everybody in the Midwest is probably like, oh, gosh, not the Dust Bowl. But it's super interesting. And, yeah. So be strong. Buy the Planter app. Come get some seeds from us. Link is below. New seeds coming out soon. Favorite the shop so you can come back to it. All that good stuff. And remember, we're going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens community garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia's at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.